Hi, good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to have such a distinguished panel this morning to share their thoughts on this year's budget. What I'll do is that we'll talk among ourselves for about maybe 30 to 40 minutes. Then I'll open to the floor. Questions you guys would like to raise. I think we want to make this session very lively, so feel free to ask questions. Okay, let me start with saying what is this year's budget is about. I mean, I'm just trying to summarize what Minister just said this morning. He said that this is a very inclusive budget. This is a budget for the people. This is also a budget for investment in the future. And more importantly, this is also a budget to look at how Singapore can restructure itself to be more competitive, not just on a domestic scene, but internationally. These are the key themes. Now I'm going to ask the panelists what is their view on this year's budget. Maybe I'll start with Meng.
The Singapore Business Federation is the apex business chamber in Singapore, formed about 10 years ago. This year is our 10th anniversary. It's also the largest business association. It has, at the moment, the latest count, I got 18,000 members. And 70% of our members are SMEs. So, which means that we are larger than, we're the largest chamber with the largest number of SMEs. So, one of the things that we did towards the end of last year was to form an SME committee. Which was announced in December, and this is because we've been getting quite a bit of feedback from our members on the issues that they face operating in Singapore. That even though, like for example, the economic performance was very high in 2010. But it did not benefit some of the SMEs, and in fact, most of them got profitability is still quite low. So we formed the SME committee to find out what these issues were. And the first task we did was, let's put up our recommendations for budget. So during, over Chinese New Year, I was working almost non-stop. I didn't even go for Chinese New Year visiting. I was putting up this budget wish list to the government. I was actually, I was talking to Irvin. I didn't have a research department, so I was actually doing my own research, going into the IRAS website to look at the PIC scheme to see what is it that our SMEs would need in terms of the PIC scheme. So I did the research, look what's the definition of R&D, automation equipment, did my own research. Fortunately, we're all quite transparent. So by the end of Chinese New Year, I have already more or less drafted the report. So this was sent out to the government just, and I think on the 29th of January. We were looking very broadly in 4 main areas. Basically, to help with cost, to help with manpower, help SMEs with internationalization, and help SME with financing. When we did the report, I was, of course, being from the SME space, a bit more avaricious. Say, let's get them to do a little bit of handout, give broad support to lots of our SMEs because they're all facing difficulties because rental high, labor is high. So give some money back. So we were arguing for a more broad-based cash payout to all SMEs. But you know what the score was. The score was that, in fact, none of that were given. But what we asked specifically in terms of maintaining the SME cash grant, increasing the SME benefits in the PIC scheme, making it a little bit more flexible, and then also the other one was the automation equipment, because the Chinese chamber was telling us that you buy precision engineering, you buy a machine, it can cost as much as a Mercedes-Benz, but you cannot, doesn't qualify for PIC because it's only over one accounting period. So we added that in over more than one accounting period. So I think when I sent up the note to Ministry of Finance, I think the officials were very, I think, treated it very seriously. They were poring over it. And I was happy that the Finance Minister actually referred to the feedback that the SME committee has given, and in fact accepted some of the recommendation. I think when I had also a similar dialogue with more SMEs just 3 days ago in the auditorium, I think 1,300 people, the sense I had and the feedback I got from them was that they were thinking of the issues raised were the restriction in manpower, and yet the sense I had from government was that in terms of foreign labor conditions, it will remain, it will tighten, and because of the circumstances, it will not be reopened again. And I get, say for example, the construction industry talking about how they should be given more preferences, more time, at this level, and the government saying, no, you have to change, and really there's a huge gap between what government wants to do and what businesses are saying that they need more time, they need more space, they need more transition, they need more assistance. So I think we are in a situation whereby I think corporates are forced to restructure, but as you can mention, you see the presentation, there's some amount of assistance given, but we also get feedback from our members that even though they are aware of some of these incentives, they are not making use of them. So to me, I think I want to examine why is it that, if there are so many incentives, and the ministers themselves say that these are very attractive incentives, very generous incentives, yet Ministry of Finance tells me, companies are telling them that there's a lot of, people are saying that it's a very complicated process of applying, so why? So I think, I just wanted to get some feedback today, what the association and what an association together with professionals like you could do to benefit our SMEs particularly, because I think we have an issue. We have the issue over the next few years, trying to get them to restructure and trying to get them to make use of some of these facilities which the government has given them. And if there's anything that, that the government could do more, and also I will welcome feedback from professionals, what more can we do? Perhaps for next year, I'll have more time to write the paper. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry for a long intervention.
That's a good feedback. I'm glad that the report, the committee that SBF chaired, the wish list, some of these have been fruitful. Let's hear what Loong has to say about this year's budget. Is this budget something that you expected or something that you caught you by surprise?
Well, actually, when I was following the budget announcement, I was actually very pleased because this is the first time where focus is being given to the lower income group, to the aged. Because in past budget, it's always business sector, but the government has neglected the lower income group for a very long time. And for example, the voucher scheme is an extremely innovative intervention, and it's unlike past budgets where it is a one-off measure. This one is going to be a permanent measure. So the government is actually focusing back on the lower income group, hence the heading of the budget towards a more inclusive society. And I also want to make a comment on what Meng has mentioned about the SME tightening of foreign workers. Now, I think we have to bear in mind that when we want the government to listen, we cannot have the cake and eat it. What happened last year during the election campaign, and even after that, the complaint was we are too crowded, we have too many foreign workers here, the trains are crowded, the buses are crowded. The government is listening. They're tightening up. And now we are complaining again. But I think what the government has correctly identified is over the last 10 years, they had been so liberal in issuing work permits to the lower skilled workers that our lowest 10% working population had been actually very badly affected. If you track the income of the lowest 10%, I think they did not have any increase over the last 5 years. And that's because we have foreign workers coming in. For example, if we pay, say, a Bangladeshi $1,000, say he spends $700, he saves $300, this $300 going home is a lot of money for them. But for $1,000 for a local person, he will have to struggle to survive. So hence the government's intention that, well, we have to tighten this, we want to increase productivity, and I have demonstrated that the government is actually very serious about it. They are putting 68 cents for every 32 cents that we put in. So they are very serious about it. And I feel that they are moving in the right direction. Of course, in the short term, there will be some difficulties, but for example, I look at SMU, we have a cleaner in the car park. I think he must be like 70 years old. He goes sweeping the car park. But with productivity going up, we do not need him to start walking and sweeping. We will buy an automated sweeper for him to sweep. Instead of one car park, he can sweep 2 car parks. And that's what we should try to do.
Thank you. Yeah, coming to this point, it's very interesting. I read in the newspaper, right, there's this pest control company saying that they employ 50-year-old worker for training, hoping to be hire older worker. But then after 1 week of training, they actually left the company because they cannot cope with catching cockroaches at age 50 and above. And the company also lamented that they can't employ or buy a robot to catch cockroaches. So precisely, sometimes, want to be productive can be quite difficult to a certain industry. Let's hear what Jillian got to say about this year's budget, whether you agree with the 2 gentlemen here or you have your own view from a policy point of view, maybe.
Okay, hi. Okay, it's quite intimidating for me to be the only government statutory body representation for this morning's panel. This morning's panel, yeah. So I think there has been a lot of focus. Clearly, the budget, from an economic development standpoint, continues to focus on productivity, innovation, and skills. So that is clearly what most people will take away from it. Maybe I'll also talk about the fact that I also personally find that the budget is quite balanced in view in that some of the comments about, now government is looking at more measures in terms of the workforce, the people, inclusive growth and all that. There are also quite a number of measures from the perspective of keeping Singapore competitive. Because obviously Singapore, is subject to a lot of external impact from the external environment. What's happening in the developed markets, the uncertainties in their economic situation, there also actually impacts a lot of our companies in terms of our exports and so on and so forth. And then coupled with the fact that, Singapore continues to face keen competition, from other locations for in terms of attraction of foreign investments. I noted that also the budget provides for quite a number of enhancements to various incentive schemes to continue to make sure that there are measures to encourage companies to invest, to put their control tower, their headquarters operations, to spearhead or lead their M&A deal structuring from a Singapore operation. Also, in terms of to encourage companies to think even beyond Singapore in terms of managing from Singapore their regional value chain of activity. So some of these measures actually, I think, also provide an avenue for companies thinking about strategies beyond the Singapore market into the regional, international market.
Okay, Irvin, coming to you. Can you share with us your view from an economic perspective? Is this a good budget or is it neutral? How does it impact Singapore in the short term and in the long term?
Okay, before I begin, just one word to Mr. Ho. If you want to spend a good New Year going forward, I'm just a phone call away. I give you my word for it. Well, from an economic viewpoint, I think this budget is a very forward-looking budget. It's a far-sighted budget. It is a budget for the future. In a bid to foster inclusive growth, the budget has focused on some of the vulnerable groups in the society, the old age Singaporeans, the disabled Singaporeans, the low-income families, as well as children from the low-income family. We've seen the introduction of the special employment credit to enhance employment of old age Singaporeans. This was also extended to disabled Singaporeans, okay, disabled workers, so that they can also benefit. We've seen the introduction of the GST vouchers, which will help alleviate the cost of living for the low income. We've seen a lot of financial assistance schemes being rolled out to help cope with the cost of education for the low income family children, so that they can move up the social status going forward. So in a way, this is essentially in line with our inclusive growth strategy, and also to prepare the economy going forward, especially when we are given an aging population. Now, in these aspects, when it comes to measures pertaining to individuals, I would say that this is a very heartwarming budget, and I fully support those measures that have been put forth. However, there's always a but, especially when you talk to economists. I have great reservations with regards to the measures that have been rolled out to further drive productivity growth and also restructuring in the economy. Well, I've seen a lot of cash grants being given out to help companies. I've seen the enhancement to the PIC schemes to help companies upgrade their productivity and technology. But essentially, I'm referring to the whip. Now, what whip is this? Essentially, it is the tightening in foreign labor policy. Now, in 2010, when after the announcement of the recommendations by the Economic Strategy Committee to tighten foreign labor policies via the hikes in foreign worker levies, I put up an article, and the title is "The Economics of Foreign Worker Levy Hikes." Now, the conclusion is that the hikes in foreign worker levies would only be effective under certain circumstances, and that is, it all depends on the elasticity of demand for foreign workers. Now, some industries has a relatively elastic demand for foreign workers. What I mean is that they find it easier to replace foreign workers with locals or replace foreign workers with technology. But this is not true for some industries, particularly for the SMEs. So it is difficult for them in a short term, in a short span of 3 years, okay, to improve their productivity, to move up the value chain. It is not something that you can do it easily in a short spans of 3 years. So the elasticity of demand for foreign workers for those industries is exceptionally inelastic. Now, what will happen if when you hike foreign worker levy, the first thing that will happen is that they will pass on these hikes to consumer. That will translate into higher inflation, and that is going to hit all Singaporeans. Now, I want to emphasize this point. This restructuring affects every one of you. It affects all Singaporeans. It affects the future of our nation. If you don't get it right, the cost will be significant. And I want to highlight, perhaps later we'll talk more in greater details about the risk, the cost of this whole restructuring. In fact, I put up an article. I brought it along with me. Okay? I'm not trying to create some publicity for myself or whatever, but really, I feel that this restructuring exercise affects every one of you. And all of you need to know what's in it for you, how it will affect you. You can get a copy of this article in our DBS website. Or if you couldn't find it, you can. I think you can actually send an email to me, and I can tell you where to get it. I can forward to you as well. But this whole restructuring exercise, frankly, will entail great pain and cost in the near term, particularly for corporates, and there will be repercussions on Singaporeans, even for the lower-wage Singaporeans that we are trying to help. I can explain further in greater details later on, especially if you have some more questions on that. But it is necessary because stiff competitions from the regional peers are catching up. We need to upgrade ourselves. Okay, we need to continue to upgrade our productivity. Okay, we need to restructure the economy. However, it's just the pace of restructuring which I'm particularly not comfortable with. All right. Essentially, for example, I've talked to a few MPs. I've always been in dialogue with them. One of the MPs highlighted this point, and that is this restructuring, this productivity drive, essentially is like riding a bicycle. In order to stay upright, you need to ride forward. The moment you stop, you fall. In response to that, I told him, yes, it is true, we need to ride forward in order to stay upright. However, we need to watch out for the potholes on the road as well. And we need to ride slowly to avoid those potholes. If you continue to just ride forward, okay, aggressively, at a very fast pace, more likely we'll hit a pothole and tumble. And furthermore, global business environment is becoming more and more competitive and more volatile. If global business cycle turns south, and when the economy gets weakened in the face of restructuring, I think we will get penalized. Take a very good example in 1985. In 1979, the NWC recommended aggressive wage hikes for 3 consecutive years. That has benefited Singapore workers directly. We saw an increase in incomes, increase in wages. Everyone was happy. However, and that was also an attempt to restructure the economy, to drive up, to weed out those less productive companies, less productive industry, and also to push industries towards more productive and higher value-added activities. But what happened in 1985 was when global business cycle turned south, Singapore dipped into a manufacturing-led recession. A lot of people lost their job. So the thing is that we need to prevent the kind of scenario from happening going forward. Okay, I think I've let too many of the cats out of the bag. We can talk about it later on, okay, in greater details.
Well, I would like to comment on Irving's take on the squeeze in foreign workers, because my feeling is the government has listened, and I'm sure all of us have read the papers that there are too many foreigners. So what can the government do? The government will have to tighten the number of foreign workers and to ensure that the economy continues to move forward. The emphasis and the correct emphasis is on productivity. It is not easy. It's like, at least for the gentlemen, when we try to pass our IPPT, we have to train very hard. Of course, some are natural athletes. Without training, you can run 2.4 in 10 minutes. But most of us are not. So we have to train very hard. In the same way, productivity increase, we have to conscientiously work at it. For example, we say the F&B industry is difficult to increase productivity. I beg to differ. A lot of us would have experiences in restaurants. They have a lot of waiters and waitresses. What do? They stand in the corner and talk. I remember when I was in London, I'm very cheapskate, I only eat in Chinatown. and only eat char siu fan. So that's the cheapest. And in one floor, you have only one waiter running all over the place. And I asked him, I said, well, why don't you have another person to help you? And the waiter said, no, I want to do it myself so that I can have more tips. So the trick is, if you are productive, you earn more, and that is the government's take. Don't employ more people, make them work smarter, make them work more efficiently. And I was talking to the ICPA's president and the secretariat, and we are trying to see how accountants can also be more productive so that we can enjoy higher pay, but we work more efficiently.
Can I just add on a little bit, and also in response to the comment particularly about Singapore being crowded out by due to strong influx of foreign workers. Now, it's a relativity issue here. I've heard these comments from many Singaporeans that you see strong influx of foreign workers and hence crowding out our public infrastructure. Have you ever wondered, is it because there's a strong increase in demand, strong inflows, or is it because the capacity is not keeping in pace? I can show you statistics to show that our investments in the infrastructure over the last few years prior to 2008 has been below the required demand, below what is enough to meet the demand. In other words, this crowding out is essentially because of underinvestments in the capacity rather than a strong surge. It may be due to strong surge in demand, but part of the reason is because of underinvestment. Take a good example, investment into public housing, HDB. Not enough flats has been built, which is why now, after Minister Kamuan has taken the Minister of MNDs, he has decided that we need to increase 25,000 BTO flats per year over the next few years. Investment into public transportation is another good example. We have been underinvesting into our public transportation. I mean, if the investment is enough, why do we need to? If you look at statistics, the investment in public transportation only spiked up in 2008. Okay, that came in the form of more MRT lines and also a widening in our expressway. All right, and then more recently, in the recent budget, the government decided that they have to come in and intervene by sponsoring 800 buses. Now, why is that so? Because if we have actually put forward all this investment earlier on, we wouldn't face this problem of crowding out. And furthermore, we talk about trying to increase productivity and increase the top line, the revenues for companies. Frankly speaking, I do know of many companies, okay, that have been over the years been increasing their productivity, trying to enhance their revenues. And recently, one company that I talked to, he told me, look, Irvin, over the last few years, I worked so hard, to improve my top line, my revenues, but now it's eroded by higher labor costs. So what's the incentive for me to enhance our productivity going forward? Perhaps survivability will continue to drive him to enhance his productivity. However, look, are we really incentivizing companies to increase their productivity by wiping out the hard work that they put in over the years to enhance productivity? You know what I mean? You increase your top line, but now your bottom line has increased because of this policy-induced wage inflation. So I think we need to think harder. I fully agree that we need to enhance productivity in longer term. We need to reduce our reliance on foreign workers. We need to employ more Singaporeans to give them more meaningful jobs. However, there are significant costs if we don't do it properly. So therefore, my take is that we should take a more calibrated approach. Because if you take a more calibrated approach, you have enough time to react. It's just like, for example, in the economy is at a crossroad. You are not sure which direction to take. Would you run forward in the direction which you think you are right? Or would you take slow steps gradually forward? Because if you need to detour, at least you don't have to make a big U-turn. So that is my point. And furthermore, I have a lot of things to say about this whole restructuring. Take, for example, we know that there will be pain. Some companies that are reliant on cheap foreign workers who essentially may find it not viable to continue. They may close shop. Okay, so we will see increase in job losses. We will see high increase in structural unemployment. But look at it this way: a lot of our low-skilled Singapore workers are employed in these industries. They may lose their job as well. And furthermore, they receive help from the government. Fine. So in a way, their livelihood has been more or less supported by government measures. But how about the middle income group? Middle income group continue to face international wage pressure because they are competing directly with the EPs. And the tightening of EPs has been significantly less. Right? And yet, they have to struggle with the gradual increase in cost of living. I believe many of you out there belongs to this middle income group. Essentially, middle income group at the end of the day will bear the brunt of this whole restructuring. This middle income group, the sandwich class, will get squeezed even further. And there are many more, frankly speaking. I think I'll leave it for later.
Okay. We all know that we need to rely less on the foreign workers, so that's where the wage subsidy scheme, special employment credit comes into play. I just want to ask Meng is that with this special employment credit scheme, plus the fact that the CPF contribution rates for the older workers will be increased, do you think these efforts are enough to engage older workers to remain in the workforce or to encourage them to come out and seek re-employment?
Now, I think it will help. Whether it is enough or not, we are at full employment, 2% unemployment, extremely low. So our members basically say, look, between a foreigner and a local, we prefer to hire a local because more loyal, you can stay here longer, whatever investments that you put under the person, is there. And so the preference is that if a local is available, that's preferred. But I think if you look at it, it's a lot of hygiene factor that needs to be done in order to encourage. And the surplus pool of labor is not so much those in the working population, it's those who have left the working population. I think housewife, I think women's participation has come down, and largely because when they marry, they have a child, they form a family, they leave the workforce, and some of them don't find difficulty in re-entering the workforce, and this is a large pool of people who have left the workforce but skilled, that you really want them to come in. But for that to happen, it's not a 9-to-5 job. They want to come in part-time. They want to work near their homes. So it does not mean that. So if a job opens at Tuas, for instance, you may not be able to get this pool. So therefore, you still need foreign workers for that factory in Tuas. So what you need to do is, as the minister has said, employers will need to restructure and redesign their jobs. Workers are older, so it's not just a matter of having statutory CPF limits that will go up. It also means that when they work, instead of temperature which is at 23 degrees, the working environment must be warmer, because older people, they feel they need a warmer environment rather than a cold environment, that sort of thing. Instead of working, having a lunch break that is 1 hour, 1.5 hour, young people may want to go have coffee and things like that. They don't mind having shorter breaks, half an hour break, but they want more breaks, because they get tired and things like that. So older people need that sort of environment, silver hair workforce. So you do need to restructure, employers need to restructure also the workforce. So it is not just the money per se, the money helps, but I think a lot of other hygiene factors need to be put in place to encourage this pool of workers, the older ones, the housewife, to come back into the workforce. And this is, I think it's a big effort. It's a big effort involving not just the companies, the associations who are the intermediators, and maybe the unions as well, and the town council people and things like that, because they know where these people are. Yeah.
I think we all agree with Meng, it's that just not the cost or in terms of subsidy, but matching the right skill set, the right competency and the ability to adapt to new working environments is very important. Let me ask a tax question now, since it's also important for Loong to give some comments. In particular about the taxation on the disposal of equity investments. What kind of details do you hope to see when IRAS release more details later on to make it more attractive?
Well, when we talk about the certainty for capital gain, it's a no-win situation. So when we want the government to come out and say, well, this is definitely a capital gain, they will also have to be very careful how to structure it. So based on the announcement, when they say a 2-year holding period, to me, a 2-year holding period is actually sufficiently long enough to demonstrate that it is indeed a long-term investment. So the Minister has already given us broadly what is required, the 2-year holding period. What I would like to see is a tweaking downwards of the equity threshold, because I have a lot of clients, when they have strategic investment, they won't invest 20%. They will probably be investing 5% or 10%. 20% is rather high, so I would like to see that threshold being reduced. Otherwise, a 2-year is a reasonable period.
Yeah, thanks. Coming to Jillian, in terms of the M&A tax allowance, it is a good step forward now that the transaction costs incurred by company can claim the M&A tax allowance. Can you share with us a bit more on the rationale of why this tax allowance can be a feature in the headquarter incentive?
Okay, hi. So for the M&A allowance, the enhancement this year was actually the provision to allow for a waiver of the ultimate holding company in the scenarios where it's not actually, the ultimate holding company is not actually in Singapore. So these are situations where we see that potentially one scenario could be that, for example, the foreign companies with very substantial headquarters operations here, the presence is really quite significant. They have headquarters function that span other activities. Then in such scenario, we actually see that M&A capability is a natural extension of that form of presence in Singapore. So one of the thinking behind it is that M&A really is part and parcel of a company, an international company strategy in growing. And then for us to anchor that sort of capability in Singapore is something that is very desirable. It will also create spin-offs to our professional services firms. The other thing is, of course, that we also want to get more out of M&A rather than just, the M&A deal structuring itself. We actually would like to see companies that actually spearhead M&A from Singapore also think about consolidating, because a lot of times when companies acquire a company or merge with another company, there will be streamlining of operations and so on and so forth. Can Singapore actually get spin-offs from those consolidation effort and streamlining? And it's in a way it's natural to think that then that could be further strengthening of the headquarters presence of that company in Singapore. That's why I think that it's a slant towards saying that waiver is provided for headquarters companies with substantive headquarters operations, and the details of what how we define these companies with substantive headquarters operations is currently being worked out, ironed out with the Ministry of Finance. Yeah.
Okay. Now let's open to the floor to ask the panel members here questions that close to your heart or you wanted to ask. Okay, there's a gentleman over there. Yeah, you can use the mic.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric. I'm a sole proprietor, auditor basically. First of all, I'd like to thank Loong for the interesting seminar this morning and the panelists for your time. I have a few comments and I have a question at the end of the comments. First, I'd like to answer Loong's question. Loong made a comment, tax advisors should be paid more than auditors. I actually agree. I have my brother and sister-in-laws are tax advisors. I said, and I agree you all should be paid more, but only for two reasons. One, the government changed the tax incentives every year. Make it so complex, only you all understand what's going on. Number two, IRAS is helping you by throwing them into jail and fining them hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. Therefore, they are paying you the money. The day come when ACRA start throwing the directors into jail for non-compliance FRS, then we will be on the same level ground. Now, to answer Ming Gate's question on why SMEs are not taking up the incentive, I can tell you it's a very simple reason. Because the government's incentive basically have, you see, is all have one line, one coding. You must spend first, then the incentive will come. The cash grant is minimum. So you spend 100,000, you get 400,000. The trouble is they're not willing to spend 100,000. Why? Actually, I think our SMEs are becoming like Gen Y, the strawberry generation. Okay? They like to rely on cheap labor, and cheap labor is always very convenient. Easy come, easy go. So it's a preferred alternative. This personal view, okay? I've had many settings I speak with a few SME because I'm an SME myself. There's an entrepreneur, very entrepreneur. He's 30 over years old. He runs 6 car wash places, and he was lamenting about the foreign talent. So actually, in the back of my mind, when I was listening to him, I think you should close all 6 because we're going to have less cars anyway. Because he runs basically his car wash using foreign talent and talent. On the other hand, I do speak a lot, quite often at SMU, particularly last year. I run external seminars there, so I'm there actually quite often. And I see the cleaners that Loong was talking about. Just share with some of you how much the cleaner earns. The cleaner has come in at 7 in the morning. He leaves at 3 in the afternoon. He has to clean the whole floor, every lecture room, tables, chairs, including the toilet on the floor. $600. He tells me he leaves at 3, he goes home, he changes, he starts another job at 7. Until 10 o'clock, he goes home. That is our local employee. So what I do is now when I do seminars, I cater more food and I pack all and I give it to them for their lunch and hopefully dinner. Until NEA now says that I cannot keep the food for more than 4 hours. So I don't know what to do now. Okay, my question. It's an Obama question. Okay, I think you have heard this. Obama, as Loong said, he's going for election this year. So his State of Union address actually picks on this tax rule, and people are calling it the Buffett tax rule. No? Warren Buffett came out and said that he's paying less effective tax rate than his secretary. Okay? Now, I'm now sitting here listening to all the incentives. I've been following up on all the various incentives. And now I'm asking myself, actually, if I restructure well enough, I think I will be able to pay less effective tax than my manager. And if I'm really good, maybe I get Loong to help me. Maybe I can pay less effective tax than my staff. So I just want the panelists to maybe comment, you know, because I don't want 10 years later to come back and then maybe we have to implement our, I don't know, Obama rule 10 years later. Do you think something like that is something that is potentially happening in Singapore? Thank you.
Well, Eric, basically, we have a very friendly corporate system. So actually, for small practitioners, consideration should be given for incorporation. Because when you incorporate, your first 300,000 have actually partial exemption of 152,500. And because you would probably hold it everything yourself, or you hold it together with your spouse, your first 3 years, you have the first 100,000 fully exempt. So actually for personal services, you should consider incorporation. And when you become a bit more successful, you own one, your wife own one, you have 2 lots of partial exemption. And then when you grow bigger, have another wife, so you have 3 lots of partial exemption.
No milli taker here.
So actually, it's a very friendly system. But coming back to the discrepancy where Warren Buffett mentioned, this actually has to do with the way US goes about legislating. Because they will legislate based on how strong your lobby is. So for the last 20 years, the banking lobby, the fund investment lobby had been very strong. So what they managed to lobby is that special bonus, we call it the carrying interests, which is effectively 20% of extra profit, becomes a capital gain. It is actually income, but they managed to lobby it and becomes capital gain. And they also lobby that capital gain should be taxed at a lower rate. Hence, all the high net worth individuals were able to structure the income into capital, and for the bankers, their carrying interest becomes taxable as capital gains as well. But coming back to Singapore, I think there are a lot of you here paying tax at 20%. But I think we should congratulate ourselves because we are successful paying tax at 20%. And honestly, 20% is not high. I feel that a reasonable individual tax rate is anything between 20 and 25. So why can't we go lower? Because when we go lower, say for example, there have been talk that we should go to 17, then something must give. Most likely the government will increase GST to 8%. So who will benefit? The higher income workers will benefit because they get a real tax reduction. But the poorer people will end up paying for the GST. So that's not something that we want to do in an inclusive society.
Thanks. Any more questions from the floor?
John Lim from HTQ Associates. It's been said that the budget this year is bittersweet. Sweet in that, has been pointed out, all-inclusive and looking after the social aspect of the society. But it's also bitter in the sense that there are pains that's coming because of all the different measures. For example, tightening of the foreign labor. Now, I'm just thinking, when we said we want to tighten the foreign labor, conceptually, because we said we want to rely less, we want to be more productive, be more innovative. I think conceptually we would agree, but I'm just thinking in practice whether it is really practical, because we are talking about a sweeping measure that covers every industry, but each industry has its own peculiarity in terms of reliance on foreign labor. When we say that we want to have the older workers, but what we are replacing, it's not really equal. You have foreign workers who are younger, that produces the work which may not be easily replaceable by an older worker. in an accounting firm, for example, if I employ someone, a foreigner, he or she may be educated in a foreign university, he or she can perform the work, but if I employ someone older, he may not be as productive. And plus other things that you said, give toilet breaks and all that. So I just want the panel to comment on whether, you know, when we say tightening foreign labor, can more be done to tweak it, to fine-tune it, to look into the various industry. Thank you.
I think the DRC for manufacturing has been reduced from 65 to 60%. For services industry, I think it's from 50 to 45. And these are very blunt rules, because services industry is the major part of our economy, and made up of different sectors. F&B is different from other social sectors, etc. So, of course, there's also a separate consideration for construction and I think marine as well. We take those two sectors aside, and these have been always the industry's association's view to the ministry that first of all, I think your rules are too blunt, because some of the industries and companies within the industry are different, but we understand the reason, because for them this is simpler to do, and it's a matter of balancing. We also suggested to them that, therefore, one suggestion was, why don't you have sharper rules for specific industry rather than one rule fits all? I think, so that's the first thing. Second thing is that, why don't you link the quota that you give or policy to the incentive of the company? So, like, for example, if the company is prepared to hire more local foreign, more older workers, for example, can you give them an incentive for more foreign worker? Or if the company wants to undertake more, have shown to undertake more productivity improvement, then can you then give them a larger number of foreign workers? So that's one way. Then the other thing that we suggested to them, why don't you, Ministry of Manpower, the officer behind the desk, you don't have to be the judge and the arbiter, you know, because sometimes people, you know, when companies apply for some of the S-passes, people to be retained, and the ministry says say no, then you have lost S-pass holder who have got many years of experience. Why don't the industry then, you know, you can ask an independent assessor to help you. The associations are prepared to be in that space and give our independent assessment, in fact, whether in this particular instance, you should consider special consideration for this particular company. The associations are prepared to help, you know, to be the intermediator, to provide an independent assessment, in fact, so that it will assist the Ministry of Manpower in making that kind of judgment. So these are the things that we are working at. There's no meeting of the eye yet, but these are agenda that we will put forward in the future.
Maybe we have one last question from the gentleman.
My name is Yeo Kwang. I will not speak from a point of view as an accountant, but I speak from a point of ASME. The other day we had meetings with some people from SBF as well, and you also touched a story about that pest master man, pest buster. His name is Thomas Fernandez. You can read the forum letter, and I asked him a question why he got scolded by the lady who wrote and complained. He said, I just want to employ to make sure that I provide a service. And if I can't get older workers, a Singaporean, I have to go and look for alternatives. And being a pest control man, he said, you can't go and get people who don't want to work, right? So he had to look for alternative, and that's suggestions. And if he were to be restricted virtually he was making a joke out, maybe more rats will be running in Singapore, then the government will think of another way how to kill those rats. Okay? And talking about Irvin Seah's points, all those are relevant points that, and back to even Meng's point, that all these points that we're raising is about the shortage of labor, the DRC, but what is the government's way of handling the situation on a case-to-case basis? And I think this point has to be raised. And if we don't do it, you look at it, a lot of SME business will close down. Does it mean that we are going to suffer? And I tell you, it is. For poor chap in a hawker center I buy fruits from, he got older man helping him. He said, the guy, I have muscle pain, this pain, that pain, and he doesn't want to work. And the poor chap has to work so hard, and he can't even get any workers. So what is our answer to it? Even with all the tax incentives, would the government be able to spend all those money to help us increase it? It's just maybe in name. You look at it, we have budgets, right? And yet, there's a surplus above what the government budgeted. That means, are the grants really being used? That's my question. Maybe Jillian, you can answer the question. Yeah. Would the grants be fully be distributed and used by all the SMEs?
I think that's a very interesting comment, and I think that's where the GST voucher system comes to play to subsidize some of the lower income people. Maybe I can ask Irvin to comment about, is this going to be a good system? Are we heading towards a welfare system? No.
For a moment, I thought I'm not given permission to speak already. No, just kidding, just kidding. Well, I think yes, the government is gradually shifting towards more social focused kind of budget. Yes, that answered the question. But to answer the question from the gentleman, those tools, as what Mr. Ho has mentioned, are blunt. And as what the gentleman just now earlier has also mentioned, different industries has different relative dependency on foreign labor. You can't get a policy that, one size fits all kind of policy and apply across the board. You're essentially, I wouldn't like use the word killing off, but the thing is that you are essentially penalizing, many companies and force them to the corner, to the wall, and they don't have a way to go, they close down. Say, for example, one company, recently I have a friend whose family owns an SME printing company. They employ foreign workers, they also employ local workers. Those local workers has been there with them for decades, okay? Now the question is, he told me, just 2 days ago, he told me, we are considering relocating to Iskandar. Then I asked him, what happened to your local workers? He said, either they move over with them or they lose a job. So at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves, really, such broad, sweeping, blunt policies, is it really helping? On the surface, from theoretical perspective, come on, economists always talk about theoretical stuff. And I went through it, but I look at it very differently. Because of the people around me, they point out to me that on the ground, many things are just not as simple as what theory can explain. I mean, you can't, and furthermore, I think the gentleman raised a very important point, and that is many of the jobs that are currently being filled by foreign, so-called low-wage foreign workers, are essentially jobs that Singaporeans shunned in the first place. They didn't want to do the job, and as a result, the companies, in order to survive, got no choice but to employ foreign workers. So now if they are not given these options to employ foreign workers, they have to close down. And so if these are jobs which cannot be replaced by a local, then frankly speaking, what we call substitution effect is not there. If the substitution effect is not there, then by tightening foreign worker levy or tightening foreign worker policy, you are not essentially benefiting the low-wage Singaporeans directly because they refuse to take up this job in the first place. Right? And frankly, the way I look at it from a broad policy perspective, and that is, we are adopting this mindset of no pain, no gain, which I think is incorrect. Because if we continue to adopt this kind of no pain, no gain kind of mindset, what will happen eventually is that it will become more haste, less speed. We may tumble on the pothole ways which I mentioned, especially if global business cycle turns south. That was what happened back in 1985. As an economist who has devoted my entire career on Singapore economy, okay, for more than a decade, that is the last thing I want to see. The economy is moving towards the next pothole. So which is why I'm not opposing this whole restructuring or the productivity drive, but I'm highlighting and cautioning the risk involved and the pain involved. And hence, I advocate a more calibrated and gradual approach so that companies can have more space, more time to do the necessary restructuring, okay, to instill technology improvements so they increase productivity in longer term. They have enough time to do that. And at the same time, most importantly, it helps all Singaporeans. So that is the basis of my argument. And in fact, I'm going to put up another article soon. It's about restructuring, complicating our exchange rate policy. Just a slight flavor, if you don't mind. Essentially, when you have restructuring, it lifts the underlying cost structure of the economy. Core inflation has already spiked up to 3.5% from 2.6%. Okay? In January, it spiked up to 3.5% from 2.6% in December. And domestic inflationary pressure is now riding an all-time high, significantly higher than imported inflation. Now, we all know as Singaporeans that the key policy tools to address inflation in Singapore is the exchange rate policy, because we keep imported inflation at bay, because a lot of goods that we consume are actually imported. So by having a strong currency, we bring down the cost of import, and hence lower inflation in Singapore. But if core inflation is rising because of the restructuring, MAS, if it follows the conventional wisdom, by seeing core inflation rising, it will tighten exchange rate policy further by strengthening the Sing dollar further. Now, what's going to happen? Exporters, the key engines of our economy, will see, number one, exports competitiveness being diluted. Our exports become more uncompetitive. And furthermore, when you convert their US dollar income that they earn back to Sing dollar, they get less. So exporters will get squeezed from the top end, and at the same time, you have to struggle with the increase in cost of businesses. You will squeeze out the key engine of our economy. Take note that 3/4 of our demand is external demand. This is an important engine of the economy. It will get squeezed if MAS continues to strengthen Sing dollar on account that core inflation is rising. So this restructuring exercise is complicating our exchange rate policy. So there are, like I mentioned, a lot of complications involved, a lot of risk, and in the short term, pain as well. We need to exercise caution and do it in a more gradual and calibrated approach. Remember, more haste, less speed.
Well, I actually have two comments to make. The first comment is Singapore as a society, we have to look at our own attitude, because honestly, there is no premium paid towards the services sector. All of us have experienced it. Singaporeans don't like to work to serve people. And that is the problem that we have in the services sector. And the other is dependency on foreign labor. So I feel what we need to do is to look at good examples. To me, a good example is Japan. If you go to Japan, the services are excellent. So we need to learn from them. How is it that they can instill the attitude of service pride to the people? So if we can do that, I think we will have half the battle won. And the other is to ask ourselves, how is it possible that in Japan, all of us know, they have very few, they call them alien workers. Very few, very difficult. And yet, they can still keep on improving productivity. I remember years ago when US was still the big producer of motor cars. suddenly they were overtaken because the Japanese could produce cars more productively. So I think we need to look at good examples and learn from them. That's what I feel is important for us.
Okay. I think our tests have one last question for the panel because we are running out of time. I think this budget, we all know that it takes care of the elderly, the low income, the needy. How about working mothers? How about encouraging Singaporeans to have more babies? It seems to miss out this critical point. Is there something you guys want to share? I know this is not part of the...
I don't know, maybe it's a recognition that tax incentive don't generate that sort of behavior. Maybe we should cut the session quickly and then all of you can go back and procreate. That's more effective than any tax incentive.
In fact, Wong, we have very generous working mothers relief. We have foreign maids levy, working mothers. We have grandparents caregiver relief. We have working mothers child relief. And then we have procreation rebate. So we have a lot of incentives for procreation, except that I think in Singapore it's so stressful that you just cannot be productive.
Maybe it's Dragon Year this year, so they don't need a tax incentive as well.
Let's hear from Jillian.
As a personal beneficiary of all these government incentives or procreation, I think that, obviously it goes beyond consideration of whether you get an incentive for it, right? And I think there has been a lot done to help working mothers at the workplace, or at least, in terms of, in my work environment, we do get things like consideration for flexible working hours and then, support for mothers if, you want to make up for time off or, to help your kids at the childcare or what have you. So there are things that are in place. Is more going to really move the needle for our working mothers to consider having more babies? I'm not sure. I think a lot of the other things that are more important, infrastructurally, do we have enough childcare centers? Do we have good schools? Can you get your kid into the primary school of your choice, and so forth? I think those are also other considerations.
Economics being to this.
As a father of a pair of twins, I've maximized my benefits. Well, I think I do agree. We have a lot of quite a comprehensive package of so-called procreation, pro-family, initiative, and so on and so forth. But the thing is that I think at the end of the day, the decision about whether couples want to have kids or not, it's a bread and butter issue. You got to do with cost of living. You got to do with our lifestyle, and these are essentially things that some policies cannot address, right? So, I guess more can be done, but the thing is that there are still some intangible, softer aspect of the issues which cannot be addressed by policies. So, certainly bringing in more foreigners may not be the best option also. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to thank the panelists for sharing their view today and also for the floor for sharing your questions.